Relax, she won't show up. That was the joke whispered near the champagne table, followed by quiet laughter and confident nods. He arrived at the gala as if the night belonged to him, his arm wrapped around another woman, certain that absence meant replacement. In his mind, power worked like a spotlight. Whoever stood beneath it mattered. Whoever didn't had already faded. What he failed to understand was how rooms remember, how silence watches, how dignity does not need permission to return. Because when his wife finally appeared, she did not argue her place. She did not explain. She simply walked in, and the energy of the room shifted without a word. Conversation stalled, smiles froze. Attention moved, not by force, but by instinct. This story explores how arrogance confuses access with authority and how presence can undo an entire performance. Where are you listening from today? Share your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to stay with us. Zarya was not in the ballroom, but she was everywhere in it. Her name floated between crystal glasses and silk sleeves, carried in lowered voices that curved around the truth without touching it. The gala unfolded exactly as planned, except for the absence no one dared to address directly. The empty chair at the front table remained untouched, its place card still aligned, as if waiting for someone who had simply stepped away for a moment. Dravius entered as though the room belonged to him. He walked in with his hand resting possessively at the small of Valeska's back, guiding her through the marble archway like a prize newly claimed. His posture was relaxed, almost lazy, the confidence of a man who believed control was permanent once seized. He smiled at the familiar faces, accepted nods and polite greetings, mistaking restraint for approval. "This is Valeska," he announced loud enough to interrupt a nearby conversation. "Our new creative director." Valeska laughed before anyone responded. It was not a soft laugh. It carried, sharp and deliberate, bouncing off the high ceiling. She leaned closer to Dravius, her fingers tightening around his arm as if to underline her position. The burgundy dress clung to her body, the slit revealing movement meant to be noticed. She knew how to command a room, or at least how to demand it. The room did not comply. A server paused mid-step, eyes flickering briefly before looking away. A woman near the orchestra table tilted her head, lips pressing into a thin line, then turned her back entirely. Conversations resumed, slightly tighter, slightly quieter. It was not rejection. It was something colder. An agreement, unspoken. Valeska noticed. Her smile stiffened for a fraction of a second before she laughed again. Louder this time. "They're just shy," she murmured to Dravius. "Power makes people nervous." Dravius smirked. He liked that explanation. It fit neatly into the story he told himself, that they were being watched because they mattered. That discomfort was admiration in disguise. He raised his glass when a longtime donor approached, clinking it confidently. "A beautiful night," he said. "Historic turnout." The donor nodded, gaze drifting briefly to the empty chair. "It is," he replied. Then without lowering his voice, "Where is Zarya tonight? The honorary seat is hers." The question landed cleanly, too cleanly. Dravius did not hesitate. He had rehearsed this moment more than once, though he would never admit it. "She's taking time away," he said lightly. "Personal care. She hasn't been herself lately." The donor studied him, expression unreadable. "I see." Dravius took a slow sip of wine, savoring the pause. "Doctors recommended rest. Zarya hasn't been stable enough for events like this." The words settled heavily between them. Not loud enough to shock, quiet enough to stain. Across the room, a few heads turned. Someone stopped mid-sentence. Someone else set their glass down without drinking. The orchestra adjusted their tempo, as if the air itself had shifted. Valeska leaned in, her voice sweet. "Such a shame," she said. "Stress can do terrible things to a woman." Dravius nodded, grateful for the support. "Exactly." The donor did not smile. He murmured a brief excuse and stepped away, already pulling his phone from his pocket. Dravius watched him go, irritation flickering briefly before being smoothed away. He straightened his cuff, adjusted his jacket. Control was never lost in one moment. It was chipped away, and he intended to stay ahead of it. Valeska squeezed his arm. "You handled that perfectly." He turned toward her, pleased. "I always do." Yet even as he spoke, he felt it. A subtle tightening in the room, the way conversations bent away from them, the way glances slid past Valeska's red dress without lingering. She was visible, undeniably so, and yet somehow misplaced. She felt it too. Her laughter softened, then sharpened again, a defensive rhythm. She scanned the crowd, searching for eyes that would hold hers. None did. Trevius lifted his glass once more, forcing ease into his smile. They'll adjust. Valeska followed his gaze to the empty chair. The untouched place setting gleamed under the lights, pristine, patient. Somewhere above them, beyond the archway and the noise, a door closed softly. No one in the ballroom heard it, but the chandelier lights flickered, just once. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was waiting. Zariah stood at the top of the staircase before the room knew she existed. For a brief moment, the gala was stripped of sound. The chandelier lights cut out without warning, plunging the ballroom into a dim wash of candlelight and confused breaths. Conversations fractured mid-sentence. Someone laughed, then stopped. The orchestra fell silent, bows hovering above strings. In that pause, Zariah inhaled once. She did not rush. She never rushed. A single spotlight ignited, clean and deliberate, fixing itself at the head of the staircase. The light found her instantly, as if it had been waiting. White silk caught the glow and returned it, colder, sharper. The dress followed her body without asking permission. The satin smooth against her skin, the crystal detailing catching light in restrained flashes. Nothing about her was excessive. Nothing needed to be. Her shoulders were bare. Her posture was not defensive. From below, faces tilted upward. A murmur spread, uneven and uncontrolled. That's her, someone whispered. Zariah stepped forward. Each movement was measured, her heel touching the velvet runner before the rest of her foot followed. She let the room look. She let it remember. The absence from moments ago reframed itself instantly. The empty chair was no longer a question. It was an insult that had expired. Halfway down, she caught sight of Dravius. He stood frozen, his glass hovering inches from his mouth. The color drained from his face slowly, as if his body needed time to process the error. Valeska's fingers tightened around his arm, then loosened. Her smile faltered. Just enough. Saria did not look away. She had heard the lie already. She had known exactly when he would tell it. Men like Dravius always chose rooms full of witnesses when they needed their version to feel real. What he had not anticipated was the cost of being overheard. The crowd parted instinctively as she reached the bottom of the stairs. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. It was a subtle shift, bodies angling aside, space being offered rather than taken. Someone exhaled in relief. Someone else straightened their jacket. Dravius found his voice first. Zariah, he said, too loud, too quick. You should not be here. She did not stop walking. Valeska tried to recover. We were just saying, she added, laughter forced into her tone. How strong you look. Zariah passed them as if they had spoken to someone else. Her gaze did not harden. It did not soften. It simply moved through them, unbothered, uncurious. The effect was immediate. Dravius lowered his glass without drinking. Valeska swallowed, her eyes darting toward the surrounding faces, searching for reassurance that did not arrive. Zariah crossed the remaining distance to the front of the room, where the chairman of the association stood speaking quietly with a donor. He turned as she approached, surprise flickering across his face before giving way to something warmer. You came, he said. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. I wouldn't miss this. The simplicity of the gesture recalibrated the room. Applause did not break out. It did not need to. Respect did not require sound. Behind her, Dravius shifted his weight. He told himself people were staring because she had made an entrance, because spectacle always drew attention. He ignored the way several board members avoided his eyes. He ignored the way one of the senior partners stepped subtly out of his reach. Valeska felt it more keenly. She adjusted her dress, the slit suddenly too high, the color too loud. Her voice rose again as she addressed no one in particular. Well, she said, this is unexpected. Zariah turned then, just slightly. Unexpected, she repeated, her tone light, almost amused. Isn't that the point of evenings like this? A few smiles appeared, not hers. Dravius opened his mouth, then closed it. Whatever argument he had prepared no longer fit the room. The narrative had shifted without his permission. Zariah accepted a glass from a passing server. She did not drink. She held it like punctuation. The orchestra resumed softly, as if unsure whether it had permission. As Zariah moved deeper into the crowd, conversations bent toward her, drawn by gravity rather than invitation. Dravius watched her go, the distance between them widening with every step she took away. For the first time that evening, he felt something unsteady move beneath his confidence. Not fear. Timing. Zaria did not claim the room. She allowed it to come to her. She moved with a quiet rhythm, stepping into conversations without interrupting them, leaving before they could grow comfortable. Her presence recalibrated the balance of each circle she entered. People straightened, voices lowered, not out of obligation, but recognition. "You timed your return well," a venture partner said, handing her a glass she did not ask for. "I prefer precision," Zaria replied. "Timing is only useful when it serves clarity." He smiled, uncertain whether he had been complimented or warned. Nearby, Dravius watched her with a tightening jaw. Each time he attempted to approach, the space shifted. A hand reached out to Zaria. A question pulled her away. She did not avoid him deliberately. She simply never arrived where he expected her to be. When he finally managed to intercept her, it was by persistence rather than invitation. "Zaria," he said, stepping into her path. "We should talk." She looked at him, eyes calm, unreadable. "About what?" He hesitated. The question was simple. The answer was not. She turned slightly, gesturing toward a man waiting beside them. "Dravius, this is Malcolm Reyes. He oversees international compliance." Malcolm nodded, already assessing. "We met briefly last year." "Yes," Zaria said, "at the audit review." Dravius forced a smile. "Of course." Zaria stepped away as they exchanged pleasantries, the conversation swallowing Dravius whole. He spoke for several minutes, explaining initiatives that sounded rehearsed even to his own ears. When he turned back, she was gone. Again, Valeska noticed the pattern before Dravius did. She stood near the bar, fingers wrapped tightly around her glass, watching men lean towards Zaria not with interest but attention. They listened. They asked questions. They did not interrupt. When Zaria spoke about market adjustments and strategic pivots, heads nodded, pens came out, phones were discreetly unlocked. Valeska laughed softly, trying to draw eyes back to herself. She leaned closer to a group of younger investors, brushing an arm here, offering a smile there. "So," she said lightly, "what do you think of the new direction?" One of them smiled politely. "It's ambitious." She waited. "But," he added, glancing past her, "I'm curious how Zaria plans to structure it." Valeska's smile held for a beat too long. "I'm sure she'll explain it." "I hope so," he replied. "She usually does." They drifted away. Valeska set her glass down with more force than necessary. She adjusted the slit of her dress, then smoothed it again, as if the fabric itself had betrayed her. She watched Zaria from across the room, the way she stood slightly apart, never leaning in, never reaching. Authority without appetite. Dravius reappeared beside Valeska, irritation bleeding through his composure. "She's doing this on purpose." Valeska did not look at him. "She's doing it well," he scoffed. "They're dazzled by an illusion." Valeska turned then, eyes sharp. "No, they're listening." Across the room, Zaria paused beside the orchestra pit, responding to a question with a brief nod. She felt the attention shift, felt the imbalance grow heavier. This was not dominance. This was isolation, unfolding naturally around those who did not belong. She sensed Valeska before she saw her. The sound of heels approached too quickly, the scent of wine preceding her. Zaria turned just enough to register the tension in Valeska's shoulders, the way her fingers curled around the stem of her glass. "Enjoying yourself?" Valeska asked, her voice bright, brittle. Zaria met her gaze. "I always do." Valeska lifted her own glass in mock salute. "Careful," she said. "White is unforgiving." Zaria smiled, small and contained. "So is carelessness." The moment stretched. Around them, conversations slowed, curiosity sharpening. Valeska's grip tightened. She shifted her weight, stepping closer than necessary. "I just thought," Valeska said, voice lowering, "a little color might suit you." Zaria's eyes flicked briefly to the glass. She saw the intent settle behind Valeska's smile. She understood the calculation. Attention demanded through damage when it could not be earned. She stepped aside. The movement was subtle, almost gracious. Valeska stumbled forward, momentum carrying her arm wide. The glass tipped, and the room inhaled. Zaria felt the shift before it happened. It was not instinct. It was pattern recognition. Valeska's movements had grown sharper, less performative. The laughter had thinned. The glass in her hand was no longer an accessory, but a tool, tilted at an angle that suggested intent rather than carelessness. Zaria stepped left. The motion was light, almost conversational, as if she were simply making room for someone else. Her heel slid, the silk of her dress whispering rather than announcing itself. No one noticed the adjustment in time to name it. The wine did not reach her. It splashed instead against white cotton, blooming across Dravius's shirt in a violent red that spread too quickly to be contained. The glass struck the floor an instant later, shattering into bright fragments that skittered across marble. Sound collapsed. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed, then stopped. The orchestra fell silent again, this time without confusion. Every eye turned toward the stain, then lifted to Dravius's face. He stood frozen, staring down at his chest as if it belonged to someone else. The red soaked deeper, undeniable. It looked almost deliberate, like a mark. Valeska's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" she breathed, too loudly. Her eyes darted toward Zarya, then back to Dravius, panic stripping away whatever confidence she had been wearing moments before. "I didn't mean," she started. Zarya raised her hand. The gesture was small. It stopped everything. "It's fine," Zarya said calmly. Her voice did not carry, yet it reached. "Accidents happen." A server appeared immediately, summoned by the silence rather than a signal. Zarya accepted the cloth without looking at him. Dravius finally reacted. "Watch what you're doing," he snapped, his voice cracking through the stillness. The command landed awkwardly without authority. No one responded to it. Zarya stepped closer to him. She placed the cloth against his chest and began to dab, careful not to smear the stain further. Her touch was precise, controlled, a little firmer than necessary. Dravius flinched. She leaned in slightly, her lips close enough to his ear that only he could hear her. Her smile, visible to the room, remained gentle. "You see, once," she murmured, "when you choose someone careless to walk beside you, the mess always finds you." Her hand pressed once more, deliberately. Dravius stiffened. "Enough," he hissed, low and urgent. "You're enjoying this." Zarya withdrew the cloth and handed it back to the server. She met Dravius's eyes fully now. There was no satisfaction there, only clarity. "You should chain," she said. "Red draws attention." Around them, conversation resumed in fragments, hushed but relentless. Phones were lifted, then discreetly lowered. Someone whispered a question that did not receive an answer. Valeska stood rooted in place, her dress suddenly too bright against the shifting mood. She reached for Dravius's arm, but he shook her off without looking at her. "This is not the time," he muttered. Her face tightened. "I said it was an accident." Zarya turned to her, expression unreadable. "Of course." The word landed softly. It carried weight anyway. She stepped back, creating distance that felt intentional rather than retreating. The room adjusted with her. A circle widened. Space opened. Dravius found himself standing alone, marked and exposed. He looked around, searching for support, for familiarity. What he found instead were eyes that slid away, conversations that reoriented without him. The stain had done its work. Zarya accepted a fresh glass from another server. This time she lifted it, though she did not drink. She felt the balance tilt further, inevitability settling into place. Dravius moved quickly, his hand closing around her wrist just long enough to be noticed. "We need to talk," he said, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Now." Zarya glanced at his hand, then back at his face. "Later," she replied evenly. "You should tend to yourself." He tightened his grip for a fraction of a second before releasing her. The contact left no mark. It did not need to. Zarya walked away without looking back. Behind her, Dravius stood amid the low hum of judgment, his shirt ruined, his control slipping. He told himself this was a momentary embarrassment, a scene, nothing more. But as Zarya moved toward the edge of the room, she felt it settle into certainty. This was no longer about appearances. It was about exposure. Zarya felt Dravius before she saw him. His presence carried a familiar pressure, a need to reclaim ground he believed had been stolen. When his hand closed around her wrist, it was not violent. It was possessive, the kind that expected obedience without asking for it. "Now," he said under his breath, "you don't walk away from me." She allowed herself to be guided, not because she had to, but because she wanted the room to see the choice being made. Conversations thinned as they passed. No one followed. No one intervened. The corner near the stage offered just enough shadow to feel private without being hidden. Dravius released her wrist and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The stain on his shirt had darkened, the red no longer fresh, no longer dramatic. Just there. "What was that?" he demanded. "Do you enjoy humiliating me in public?" Zarya turned to face him fully. Her expression was calm, almost curious. She studied him the way one examined a flawed structure, noting stress points rather than surface damage. "I prevented a scene," she said. "You're welcome." He let out a short laugh. Don't pretend this was about control. You're jealous. The word hovered between them, fragile and desperate. Jealous, she repeated softly. Of what exactly? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You see her. You see how people respond. You know you're no longer the center of this. Surya reached up and adjusted his bow tie, straightening it with practiced ease. The intimacy of the gesture unsettled him more than anger would have. I'm still cleaning up after you, she said. That hasn't changed. His jaw tightened. You think you still matter because they look at you? I run this company. I make the decisions. You've been a shadow for years. She smiled then, brief and controlled. It was not warmth, it was recognition. A shadow, she said. That's an interesting word. He leaned in, voice sharp. You should have stayed away tonight. You're embarrassing yourself. Zoraya's smile did not fade. No, she replied. I'm embarrassing you. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He masked it quickly, scoffing. You always did enjoy drama. She stepped back, creating space between them. Her voice lowered, steadier than before. This is your warning, she said. The last one. Dravius laughed again, louder this time, as if volume could reassert control. Threats don't suit you. They aren't threats, Zoraya replied. They're schedules. He frowned. What are you talking about? She glanced toward the stage where technicians were making final adjustments to the screen behind the podium. The Gala logo pulsed faintly, waiting for its cue. You've been very busy, she continued. Moving funds, reassigning accounts, signing off on decisions you assumed no one would question. His expression hardened. You don't have access. Surya met his gaze. I don't need permission. For a moment, the noise of the room pressed back in. Laughter and clinking glasses, pretending nothing important was happening in this corner. Dravius searched her face, looking for exaggeration, for bluff. He found neither. You're bluffing, he said finally. You always like to sound prepared. She laughed quietly. The sound did not invite response. I like to be prepared, she corrected. There's a difference. The master of ceremonies' voice rose suddenly, cutting through the room with practiced charm. Ladies and gentlemen, if we may have your attention. Zoria turned away from Dravius without waiting for his reply. She smoothed the fabric of her dress, the white unmarked, untouched. As she stepped toward the stage, a few heads turned, sensing movement before understanding it. Dravius followed her with his eyes, pulse quickening. Zoraya, he called, keeping his voice low. Don't do this. She paused at the first step, glancing back at him over her shoulder. You should look up, she said. It's almost time. The lights shifted. The room quieted. Zoraya ascended the stage with measured grace as the screen behind her flickered once, then held. Dravius stood frozen in the crowd, staring at the space above her head, the weight of her words settling too late. Whatever she had brought with her tonight was no longer hers alone. It was about to belong to everyone. Zoraya stood at the podium as if she had always belonged there. The spotlight found her again, steady and deliberate, washing the white of her dress into something sharper. She rested her hands lightly on the edge of the lectern, feeling the faint vibration of the room settling. The hum of voices faded, replaced by expectancy. She did not rush to fill it. Good evening, Arstar, she said. Her voice carried without effort. It did not ask for attention. It assumed it. A few polite responses drifted back. She waited until the last of them fell away. We gather here every year, Zoraya continued, to celebrate growth, generosity, and trust. Tonight, I want to speak about the last one. She let the word land. Trust. From the crowd, Dravius shifted his weight. His eyes flicked to the screen behind her, then back to her face, searching for signs of performance. He found none. Zoraya was not acting. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Trust, she said, is not emotional. It is structural. It lives in records, in signatures, in patterns that do not lie even when people do. A murmur rippled through the room. Not discomfort yet, curiosity. The screen behind her changed. The Gala logo dissolved into clean lines and muted colors. Charts appeared, elegant and restrained. Numbers arranged themselves with calm authority. Zoraya did not turn around. She did not need to. These are internal transfers, she said, recorded as operational expenses. Hospitality, consultancy, development initiatives. A man in the second row leaned forward. A woman beside him lifted her phone, then lowered it again, thinking better of it. The destinations, Zoraya continued, were not operational. The chart shifted, account names surfaced, dates aligned. From the side of the room, Valeska froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her dress suddenly louder than she intended. She glanced toward Dravius, eyes wide, waiting for instruction that did not come. Dravius felt the room tilt. His mouth opened, then closed. He told himself the numbers could be interpreted. Everything could be interpreted. Zarya finally looked back at the screen. Just once. These funds were redirected, she said evenly, repeatedly, over time, always approved by the same signature. She paused. My husband's. The silence that followed was not shocked. It was surgical. Someone exhaled sharply. Someone else whispered a name, then stopped. The orchestra did not move. Dravius stepped forward instinctively, then halted when he realized no one had made space for him. His voice sounded too loud when he spoke. This is a misunderstanding, he said. These were temporary reallocations. Zarya turned back to the room, not to him. Temporary implies return. Another chart appeared. No arrows pointed back. None of these funds were restored, she said. Instead, they accumulated in accounts registered under a private individual. She did not say the name. She did not have to. Several heads turned toward Valeska at once. She shrank under the attention, one hand gripping the back of a chair for balance. Dravius shook his head, a sharp, dismissive motion. You're twisting data. Zarya met his gaze then, calm and unwavering. Data does not twist. She drew a breath. This was the moment she had measured, rehearsed, contained. With 60% controlling interest, she said, I am obligated to act. The words shifted the air. I am formally removing Dravius from his position, effective immediately. The room broke into sound. Not applause, not outrage. Voices overlapping, urgent, restrained only by proximity to power. Phones came out openly now. Messages were sent. Calls were placed. Zarya raised her hand again. The room quieted. All documentation has already been submitted, she said, this morning, to the appropriate authorities. Dravius stared at her, comprehension arriving too late to be useful. You planned this, he said, the accusation hollow. Zarya inclined her head slightly. I prepared. Security at the edge of the room exchanged a glance. One of them touched an earpiece. Valeska stepped back, bumping into a table. Glassware rattled. She looked around wildly, searching for someone to anchor herself to. No one met her eyes. Zarya stepped away from the podium. She did not wait for reaction. She did not watch the collapse. She moved through the space as it rearranged itself around her, purposeful and unhurried. Behind her, Dravius felt hands at his elbow. Not rough, firm, professional. This is a mistake, he said, louder now. She's manipulating you. No one answered. As Zarya reached the foot of the stage, she felt the finality settle. Not triumph. Release. The truth had been spoken. What followed would not be her responsibility. Zarya felt the room fracture behind her. It did not explode, it unraveled. The moment she stepped away from the stage, the silence she had commanded dissolved into overlapping reactions. Voices rose, not in chaos but calculation. Investors leaned toward one another, phones already in hand. Names were whispered with urgency. Schedules were being rewritten in real time. Zarya did not turn around. She moved through the crowd with measured calm, aware of the way space opened before her now without hesitation. People stepped aside instinctively, not out of courtesy, out of recognition that something irreversible had just occurred. Behind her, Dravius struggled to speak over the hum. This is absurd, he said, his voice sharp with disbelief. You're all overreacting. No one answered him directly. A board member he had known for years avoided his gaze entirely. Another murmured something into his phone, face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. The authority Dravius had worn so comfortably minutes earlier had evaporated, leaving behind something thin and exposed. Valeska stood frozen near the edge of the room. Her red dress no longer announced confidence. It betrayed her. It made her impossible to ignore at the exact moment she needed to disappear. She clutched her purse against her body, eyes darting from face to face, seeking rescue. Dravius, she whispered urgently, say something, fix this. He rounded on her, the control he had lost turning sharp and misdirected. This is your fault. Her mouth fell open. What are you talking about? You rushed, he snapped. You pushed me. You made me careless. The words landed hard. Several nearby guests paused, listening without appearing to do so. Valeska felt the isolation close in, the invisible wall forming around her. I trusted you, she said, her voice breaking despite herself. Dravius laughed once, harsh and humorless. You trusted the wrong thing. Zarya heard none of it. She stood near the exit now, accepting quiet nods from people who had once treated her presence as decorative rather than decisive. A woman she barely recognized reached out, touching her arm briefly. "You handled that with remarkable restraint," the woman said. Zarya inclined her head. "I believe in clean endings." From the corner of her vision, she saw security approach Dravius and Valeska. Not aggressively, methodically. The kind of movement that suggested protocol had already been triggered. "Sir," one of them said evenly, "we need you to come with us." Dravius recoiled. "On what grounds?" "You've been notified," the man replied. "Please don't make this difficult." Valeska's breath came shallow. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "I haven't done anything." The guard's gaze flicked to her. Neutral, uninterested. "We'll sort that out." They guided Dravius forward. He resisted just long enough to draw attention, his voice rising. "She planned this," he said, pointing toward Zarya. "She manipulated all of you." A few people looked at Zarya then, not with doubt, with something closer to understanding. She turned. The room quieted just enough. Dravius's eyes met hers, searching for a crack, a plea, anything human to latch onto. What he found instead was distance, not cruelty, resolution. As they passed her, Valeska faltered. Her confidence collapsed completely, replaced by desperation. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping. "Zarya." Zarya stepped closer, just enough for her words to carry. "Don't worry," she said softly. "They'll give you something to wear." Valeska frowned, confused. "Orange," Zarya added. "It suits bold personalities." A few nearby guests inhaled sharply. No one laughed. They did not need to. Valeska's face flushed, then drained. She said nothing as the guards led her away. The doors closed behind them. The gala resumed, though it no longer resembled the evening that had begun hours earlier. Music returned. Glasses were refilled. But the mood had shifted permanently. What had been a performance of wealth had become an exhibition of consequence. People gathered around Zarya now, offering congratulations phrased carefully, admiration masked as professionalism. She accepted them briefly, politely. She did not linger. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. A message from her attorney. 2 words. "It's done." Zarya exhaled. Not relief, completion. She turned toward the exit, her reflection briefly catching in the glass. The woman looking back at her was composed, unburdened. No longer waiting. Outside, the night waited. Zarya did not stay to be celebrated. She declined the invitations with practiced ease, brief smiles replacing explanations. Compliments followed her like echoes, respectful and restrained. She accepted none of them as proof of anything. Validation had never been the goal. Clarity had. At the edge of the ballroom, she paused once, allowing the sound to recede. Music had returned, softer now, as if aware it no longer held the center of the evening. Laughter existed again, careful and selective. The gala would continue. It always did. Institutions survived embarrassment by pretending it was refinement. Zarya turned away. Outside, the night air met her bare shoulders, cool and honest. The city breathed differently here. Less curated, more real. A car waited at the curb, its door already open. The driver nodded without speaking. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The interior was quiet, insulated from the world she had just dismantled. Streetlights slid across the window, one after another, dissolving as quickly as they appeared. Zarya rested her head back against the seat, letting the movement carry her. Her phone vibrated again. Another message, this one from the board chair. "We will follow your lead." She did not respond. There would be meetings, restructuring, press statements shaped carefully enough to avoid naming what everyone already knew. None of that belonged to this moment. She slipped her left hand from her lap and looked at the ring. It caught the faint glow of passing lights, flawless and impersonal. She remembered when it had been placed there, the weight of expectation disguised as promise, how easily permanence had been assumed. Zarya twisted it once, then slid it free. The ring rested in her palm for a second longer. Not sentiment, assessment. Then she opened the glove compartment and set it inside, closing the lid with a quiet click. Finished things did not need ceremony. The car slowed at a red light. In the reflection of the window, she caught sight of herself. The woman looking back was composed, unburdened. No tension held in her jaw, no calculation waiting to be deployed. She smiled. Not the smile she wore in rooms full of power. This one belonged to no audience. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Anywhere else tonight?" Zarya considered the question. For the first time in years, the answer did not feel predetermined. "No," she said, "home." As the car pulled away, the hotel receded behind them, its lights shrinking into something decorative rather than dominant. The city opened up wide and unclaimed. Zarya closed her eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, but in recognition. She had not been abandoned. She had exited. What waited ahead was not revenge or triumph. It was authorship. And she intended to write it on her own terms. Sometimes the most decisive moments do not arrive with noise or applause. They arrive quietly when a person chooses to stop explaining themselves and start standing where they belong. Stories like this do not exist to point fingers or assign simple blame. They exist because many people recognize the patterns, the subtle dismissals, the confidence borrowed rather than earned, the way silence is often mistaken for weakness, impatience for permission. What matters is not the setting or the outcome, but the choice. The moment someone realizes that dignity does not need approval and clarity does not require permission. Power in its truest form is not taken from others. It is reclaimed from within. If parts of this story felt familiar, you are not alone. These dynamics appear in families, workplaces, and communities everywhere, even when they wear different names. Thank you for listening and for staying until the end. If this story stirred a thought or a memory, feel free to share your perspective. Until next time, take care and trust your sense of when it is time to step forward.